I speak 9 languages, the young black girl declared with pride. The millionaire smirked, certain it was a childish exaggeration. But moments later, as her calm voice unraveled mysteries written in ancient scripts, the entire room shifted. His laughter turned to silence, his arrogance to awe. This is the story of a 12-year-old girl who carried wisdom greater than wealth, and how a single moment of truth on the 52nd floor changed not just one man's life, but the future of many. The 52nd floor of Sullivan Tech was nothing short of a kingdom in the sky. The office stretched wide with walls of black marble, floors that swallowed footsteps, and chandeliers that glowed like captured starlight. From its glass windows, the lights of Manhattan spread out endlessly, a city alive and restless far below. At the heart of this kingdom sat Rick Sullivan, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless success. His suits were stitched in Europe, his watches cost more than apartments, and his laugh, sharp, metallic, echoing off the marble, was known to cut people down faster than any contract. To Rick, wealth was proof of intelligence. Power was proof of worth, and anyone who lacked both was beneath his notice. That day, as the afternoon sun poured into his office, Rick tilted his wrist slightly so that his $80,000 watch caught the light. It was not to check the time. He always had assistants for that. But as a reminder to anyone who dared look his way, this is who stands above you. "Send them in," he spoke into his gold-plated intercom, his voice smooth but commanding. The glass doors slid open with a soft sigh. Carmen Johnson entered first, pushing a cleaning cart that rattled gently on the plush carpet. She wore the dark blue uniform of the janitorial staff. Neat, pressed, but meant to blend into the background. For 8 years, Carmen had worked on this very floor, scrubbing away invisible stains under the cold stare of luxury. She had learned to walk softly, speak little, and remain unseen. But today, someone walked beside her. A thin black girl, no older than 12, stepped into the room. Her shoes, though not new, were polished to a quiet shine. Her school backpack hung over her shoulder, worn at the edges but spotless, as if its owner cared deeply for even the smallest of her possessions. Her name was Lucia Johnson, Carmen's daughter. Lucia's eyes scanned the office with a mixture of curiosity and quiet defiance. She looked not with the timid awe of a child in a forbidden palace, but with the sharp gaze of someone measuring a place she had already imagined in stories and lessons. Rick circled them slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. His smirk deepened. "Carmen," he said, drawing out her name as if it were a joke. 8 years here, yes? And still pushing carts. Remind me again, what's your education level?" Carmen lowered her head slightly. "I finished high school." "Only high school," Rick repeated, letting the words drip with disdain. He chuckled, shaking his head. "And this is your daughter? The little colored girl learning how to dream big?" His eyes darted to Lucia, his smirk curling. "This place isn't for people with your skin color to dream, you know." The words, though spoken casually, carried the weight of knives. Carmen's shoulders stiffened. For years, she had learned to shrink under such remarks, to endure silently. But today, she was not alone. Lucia lifted her chin. She did not flinch. She did not look away. Rick, amused, fanned out a bundle of yellowed pages from his desk and held them out like a magician preparing a trick. "Let's have some fun," he sneered. "An ancient manuscript. Bought it last month at auction. 5 top translators couldn't crack it. They called it a linguistic maze. Classical Chinese, Arabic, Sanskrit, ancient Hebrew, Persian, Latin, each section in a different tongue." He leaned toward Lucia, his eyes gleaming. "Go on, little girl. Guess what it says." Lucia looked down at the pages. The script twisted like rivers, splitting into countless streams. She did not rush, nor did she shrink back. Rick leaned back into his chair with a laugh. "You see, Carmen? You scrub toilets for people smarter than you. Intelligence is inherited, you know, and with skin like that, climbing these stairs will always be harder. He expected silence, perhaps tears. Instead, he was met with a voice, calm, steady, and sharper than his watch's glint. You said the translators couldn't read it, Lucia replied softly. Can you? Rick blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I'm a businessman, not a translator. Then you can't read it either, Lucia said, her eyes unwavering. Yet you mock others for not being able to. Money isn't proof of intelligence. The room fell silent. The hum of the air conditioning tightened like a wire. Carmen's breath caught in her chest. For the first time in years, she saw her daughter speaking into the silence that had always drowned her own voice. Rick's face flushed. His arrogance faltered for a split second. Then, regaining his composure, he snapped, Do public schools teach you to talk back like that? A poor black kid claiming she can read what white PhDs couldn't? Stop deluding yourself. Lucia did not look away. I speak 9 languages, she said, her tone firm but not boastful. If you want, I'll try. Rick scoffed. 9 languages? That's rich. List them. Lucia raised her hand and began to count off on her fingers, her pronunciation crisp and clear. Spanish, native, English, advanced, Mandarin, basic, Arabic, conversational, French, intermediate, Portuguese, fluent, Italian, basic, German, conversational, Russian, basic. Each word landed like a hammer against the marble silence of the office. Rick laughed loudly, though the sound carried a forced edge. A black public school girl claiming 9 languages? That's clickbait, not reality. Proof, girl. Give me proof. Lucia's voice didn't waver. The New York Public Library offers free language classes after school, she explained. Mr. Ahmed teaches Arabic on Thursdays. He was once a literature professor in Damascus. Now he drives a taxi. Mrs. Wang teaches Mandarin on Tuesdays. She used to chair a department in Beijing. Ms. Maria Rossi teaches Italian on Saturdays. She cleans houses by day, but teaches for free at night. She paused, her gaze steady. They're not rich in money, but they're rich in knowledge. I learned from them, from books, from apps, from people. Anyone can learn if given respect and opportunity. For the first time in his empire of stone and glass, Rick Sullivan felt a crack. The smirk wavered on his lips. He glanced at the manuscript, then back at the girl who stood before him with nothing but a school backpack and a steady voice. Go on, then, he muttered, quieter now, his chin flicking toward the pages. Lucia drew a deep breath. She placed her small hands gently on the brittle manuscript. The air shifted. She began to read. Classical Chinese flowed from her lips in sharp, luminous strokes. Ancient Arabic followed, melodic and curling like the patterns of a carpet. Sanskrit syllables landed heavy, like seeds waiting to grow. Ancient Hebrew, Persian, medieval Latin, each tongue distinct, yet together weaving meaning like a river, coursing through many lands. Rick's jaw slackened. The sound of her voice filled the room with a power he had never known. Not the power of money or status, but the wings of knowledge. Carmen's hand rose to her chest. Her eyes brimmed with tears. For years, she had worked unseen, unacknowledged. Yet here was her daughter, speaking the words of civilizations, standing unshaken before a man who had built towers of arrogance. Lucia looked up. Her voice remained calm. Shall I translate the meaning for you? Rick could not find his arrogance. He could only nod. Lucia began to translate, her words soft but firm. The manuscript speaks of wisdom and wealth. True wisdom is not found in gilded palaces, but in a humble heart. True wealth is not counted in money, but in the ability to see dignity in every person. True power does not humiliate. It lifts others up. The silence that followed was unlike any Rick had ever known. For the first time in years, he did not feel tall. He felt small. and standing before him was not just a little girl, but a teacher. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder than Rick's own thoughts. For the first time in a long while, he had no sharp reply, no quick insult, no way to hide behind the armor of money. He sat back slowly in his leather chair, his fingers curling against the edge of the desk, as though gripping it could steady him. Across from him, the 12-year-old girl stood steady, her small hands resting on the ancient manuscript. Her gaze didn't waver. She wasn't angry, she wasn't smug. She was simply firm, and that firmness unsettled him more than any boardroom rival ever had. Rick's throat felt dry. He cleared it, trying to reclaim the authority in his voice. "I'm sorry." The words were clumsy, foreign. They fell from his mouth like heavy stones hitting marble. Carmen's head shot up. In all her 8 years working here, scrubbing, sweeping, collecting trash, enduring humiliation, she had never heard anyone on the 52nd floor apologize to her, not once. Her hands, still gripping the cleaning cart, trembled slightly. Lucia, however, did not look impressed. She shook her head slowly. "Words aren't enough," she said quietly. "Actions matter." Rick blinked. He was used to people begging for his approval, desperate for even a crumb of his acknowledgement. Yet this child, this janitor's daughter, was giving him conditions. What do you mean?" he asked. Lucia's eyes locked onto his. "If you truly want to change, I'll set the conditions. You'll follow them. That's how an apology becomes real." Rick almost laughed again, but the sound died in his throat. There was no mockery left to hide behind. Something in the steadiness of her voice stripped him of it. He nodded slowly, as if compelled. "Go on?" Lucia raised her hand, ticking the first finger. 1. You apologize to my mother. Not just for today, but for the last 8 years you treated her like she was invisible. You will say her full name, and you will look her in the eyes when you do it." Rick's chest tightened. He turned his head slowly toward Carmen. Her uniform looked suddenly less like an outfit of servitude and more like a shield that had borne years of invisible battle. He swallowed hard. "Carmen Johnson," he said, his voice faltering at the edges. I am sorry for not seeing you as a person, for humiliating you in front of your daughter, for never once asking about your life." Carmen's lips parted slightly. The man who once walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture was now struggling to form human words in her direction. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she stood taller, as if this moment was a recognition she had been denied for far too long. Lucia raised her second finger. 2. You will use your power the right way. You will create scholarships for students from working families, especially those who are ignored because of skin color or where they come from. You will fund free language programs at the public library. You will create real career paths for service workers in your company, so that hidden talent can step into the light. Rick inhaled sharply. His instinct was to calculate costs, to think in terms of ROI and quarterly margins. But for once, the thought felt empty. He nodded slowly. "How many scholarships?" 150, Lucia replied firmly. "Not a PR number, not a token gesture. Enough to carry a whole class of students, big enough that you can't back away later." Rick felt the ground shift beneath him. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, silenced competitors, bent politicians with donations. Yet here, before a girl barely tall enough to see over his desk, he found himself agreeing without bargaining. Lucia raised her third finger. 3. You will learn a new language yourself. So you will know the feeling of starting from zero, of struggling, of stumbling. Every Tuesday after work, you will come to the New York Public Library. I'll teach you Mandarin. Not in a VIP room, not with glass chairs and assistants, just wooden tables and pencils, like everyone else. Rick let out a soft laugh, not mocking, but weary. He remembered sneering at the very idea only minutes ago. Now it felt like a mountain he must climb. "Agreed," he said quietly. Lucia studied his face for a long moment. He didn't look away. He had spent his life avoiding vulnerability, but now, strangely, he felt relief in not turning his gaze. "Do you want to hear the conclusion of the manuscript?" Lucia asked. Rick nodded. Lucia looked down at the yellowed pages and read aloud, her voice gentle but piercing. "The richest person is the one who enriches others. The strongest is the one who helps the weak to stand. The wisest is the one who knows he was once blind." Carmen's tears finally spilled, not from humiliation, but from release. Years of silent endurance cracked open, replaced by the sight of her daughter standing tall and a powerful man bowing to words he could not dismiss. Rick turned his eyes to the city beyond the glass walls. The skyline still shimmered, the lights still pulsed, but they felt different now, like a reflection of something he had never truly seen before. Lucia closed the manuscript gently. "We're done here. See you Tuesday at the library. Bring a notebook with grid lines and a pencil. Homework. Practice the 4 tones. Copy 10 radicals." Rick gave a faint, almost sheepish smile. Understood. For the first time, he turned to Carmen without sneer or arrogance. "Thank you, Carmen." Saying her name didn't make him poorer. Somehow, it made him richer. As mother and daughter pushed the cleaning cart out of the 52nd floor, the carpet no longer seemed to swallow the sound of its wheels. Perhaps because the gravity of the room had shifted. The rules of the game had changed. 2 days later, Rick found himself standing in the grand lobby of the New York Public Library. The smell of old paper and polished wood wrapped around him, unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He wore no tailored suit today, only a plain jacket. In his hands, a grid-lined notebook and a pencil purchased hurriedly at a stationery counter. For the first time in years, he arrived on time without an assistant to announce him. Around him, life unfolded quietly. An elderly woman guided her grandson through math problems. A group of high schoolers huddled over their homework, whispering. At a far corner, 2 immigrants typed slowly at public computers, afraid the English words might slip away if they weren't careful. "You came ill," a familiar voice said. Rick turned. Lucia approached, her backpack heavy with books, her navy hoodie pulled over her shoulders. She didn't bow to power, nor did she flaunt pride. She simply looked at him with the calm authority of a teacher expecting a student. "Class rules," she said matter-of-factly. "No VIPs. Phones on silent. Don't interrupt. Mistakes get corrected, not ridiculed." Rick nodded and silenced his phone. He pulled out his pencil like a schoolboy. Lucia flipped open her own notebook. On the first page were 4 large tone marks, 1 flat line, 1 rising arrow, 1 dip, then rise, 1 falling stroke. "Ma, ma, ma, ma," she read, her voice clear and sharp. Rick repeated clumsily, "Ma." Lucia shook her head, smiling faintly. "Better than the first time. Try again." For an hour they wrestled with sounds that twisted his tongue and humbled his pride. Sweat gathered at the back of his neck, not from heat but from effort. At the Summit Club, a single mispronunciation would have been an excuse for mockery. Here, mistakes were rungs on a ladder. At the next table, a Middle Eastern man in his 50s gave Rick a small nod when he finally got the tone right. "This is Dr. Ahmed," Lucia introduced. "He was a professor of Arabic literature. Now he drives a cab by day and teaches letters by night. He's my Arabic teacher." Rick rose instinctively, awkward in front of a man without a title plate. "Good evening, Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Ahmed said slowly, his English graceful. "Here we switch roles. Humility is the common language." The words landed on Rick like a soft hammer. Midway through the lesson, an elderly woman with silver hair passed by. "Mrs. Wang," Lucia called warmly. "My student here pronounced ma correctly today." Mrs. Wang's face wrinkled into a smile. Everyone stumbles at first. What matters is stumbling in the right direction. Rick chuckled softly. All his life he had climbed by conquest. Today, he was being taught how to stumble properly. At the end, Lucia closed her notebook. Homework: 10 radicals, 5 greetings, 20 rounds of the 4 tones. Tuesday, same spot. Wooden table number 12. If you miss, you make it up. Not with money. Rick nodded. He looked around the modest room. Wooden chairs, scratched tables, and thought of the 52nd floor with its marble and glass. Somehow, this place felt richer. The feeling of being allowed to be weak, here, was strangely safe. Rick Sullivan had spent decades building an empire on speed, numbers, and intimidation. Yet for the first time, he entered his own boardroom with a notebook filled not with financial charts, but with words written in a 12-year-old's hand. Humiliation, education, action, multiplication. The mahogany table gleamed under the light. Around it sat his executives, men and women in polished suits, laptops open, pens poised, eyes sharp with expectation. They were used to graphs, percentages, quarterly forecasts. Today, they were about to hear something different. Rick cleared his throat. He looked at the faces around him. Mark Green, the CFO, a man who believed numbers were the only truth. Susan Lee, the head of HR, cautious but pragmatic, and several vice presidents, each calculating how any change might touch their bonuses. Instead of opening a presentation deck, Rick pulled out the notebook. Before we talk profits, he said slowly, we need to talk about respect. The room went still. Rick continued, voice steadier now. 150 full scholarships for students from working families, long-term funding for 12 public library branches, and a career path for our service staff, from janitorial to operations, from invisibility to recognition. Mark Green frowned. Rick, this isn't philanthropy hour. How much will this cost? The shareholders will want to know the return on investment. Rick didn't flinch. ROI will come in retention, in productivity, in reputation. If you want numbers, measure them again in a year. But if you want longevity, this is the investment. A murmur rose around the table, some skeptical, some quietly intrigued. Susan Lee leaned forward. Who will lead it? Rick turned his gaze to the doorway. The room stiffened as Carmen Johnson entered, not in her cleaning uniform, but in a plain blouse, holding a notebook of her own. On its cover, written in neat handwriting, were 4 words: naming, listening, fairness, opportunity. Carmen's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. Respect starts with calling people by their real names. The next step is listening with responsibility. From there, we fix contracts, schedules, and benefits. Opportunity must come with guidance. The silence that followed was heavier than any financial report. Executives exchanged glances, some skeptical, others embarrassed. Isn't this favoritism? One vice president muttered. Promoting a janitor to management just because of her background. Rick's voice cut through, calm but firm. No, it's correction. We've ignored hidden talent for too long. If you have doubts, sit in today's listening circle. Hear her story before judging. That afternoon, chairs were arranged in a circle in the conference room. No head of the table, no podium, just equal seats. Developers, managers, janitors, and security guards sat side by side. Lucia, in her school uniform, sat at the center, leading with an open question. When have you felt invisible at work? An Indian engineer hesitated, then spoke softly. My accent. In meetings, people mock it behind my back. A cleaning woman said, for 3 years, I was just called the lady, never by my real name. One manager shrugged. I didn't mean it as an insult. Lucia looked at him calmly. The issue isn't intent, it's impact. From now on, we use names. If you slip, correct it immediately. No excuses." Rick sat quietly, absorbing the stories. He had spent years surrounded by polished numbers, but here, raw honesty carried more weight than any graph. Not everyone welcomed change. That evening, a post appeared on the company's internal chat. "Tuesday Mandarin with the janitor's kid. Is this mandatory now?" It wasn't vulgar, but it was laced with venom. Rick read it. For a moment, his old instincts urged him to ignore it. Silence dissent. Move on. But he remembered Lucia's words. Words aren't enough. Actions matter. He replied publicly, "We don't mandate language learning. We mandate respect. Anyone calling a child the janitor's kid needs to relearn how to speak about people." The debate exploded. Some employees supported him. Others muttered he was being too sensitive. Rick didn't delete the arguments. Instead, he scheduled 2 more listening circles. Carmen kept time. Lucia asked questions. By the 3rd session, the tone began to shift. People started to see. It wasn't favoritism. It was fairness. But resistance came from outside, too. At the Summit Club, under chandeliers and velvet curtains, Rick's old circle of wealthy friends gathered. Bradley Carter, a hedge fund titan, raised his glass. "So, Rick, I hear you're taking Mandarin classes at the public library. Promoted a janitor to management. Is this a charity drive or a midlife crisis?" Sebastian Price, Pharmaceuticals, scoffed. "Or maybe you're preparing to sell out to Chinese investors. Don't kid yourself. Talent isn't found in basements." Rick's hand tightened around his glass. 6 weeks ago, he would have laughed with them. Today, his voice was steady. "Her name is Carmen Johnson. She leads our People Development Program. And yes, I'm learning Mandarin from her daughter, Lucia Johnson." The men around the table laughed bitterly. "You're weakening your position," Bradley sneered. "Shareholders don't pay for social experiments. Adjust in a week, or you'll be out of this circle." Rick stood slowly, leaving his glass behind. "Then I'll walk out now. Keep your circle. I have a new one. The library, the scholarships, the students." The room fell silent as his footsteps faded. The following week, Rick stood before the shareholders. The auditorium buzzed with unease. Reports and charts filled the screens. Mark Green presented cautiously conservative forecasts. A shareholder raised a hand. "We hear costs are rising from scholarships and libraries. What about margins?" Rick didn't dodge. "Yes, costs rose, but turnover dropped. Productivity stabilized. Workplace accidents fell by 30% after retraining and schedule adjustments. And our applicant pool doubled because of our reputation." Another shareholder frowned. "That's correlation, not causation." Rick nodded. "Agreed. That's why we'll test it. 2 units will replicate the model. 2 will remain unchanged. 6 months of data. I'm betting on people." The room murmured. For once, his gamble wasn't on markets or mergers, it was on human dignity. That afternoon, a janitorial poster celebrating the new scholarship program was found defaced in the lobby. A crude drawing and a bitter message. "Stay in your lane." Employees gathered in shock. Security rushed to investigate. Carmen stood still, pale but steady. Lucia arrived, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She stared at the vandalized poster for a moment, then pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. "We do 2 things," she said firmly. 1, erase it. Filth doesn't get to stay on a wall of opportunity. 2, we don't erase in silence. We correct it publicly. Rick nodded. He called the janitorial crew with cleaning supplies, then set down a portable speaker. His voice rang out across the lobby. "Here, we call people by their names. Here we fix what's wrong. This attack isn't against a poster. It's against Carmen Johnson, against Lucia Johnson, and against anyone who believes education is a right." He paused. We don't retaliate, but there are consequences. Within hours, the cameras identified a mid-level manager. Confronted, his face burned with shame. "I did it," he blurted. "I was angry. The company's changing too fast. I didn't mean to insult her skin." Carmen met his eyes, calm but unyielding. "Lack of intent doesn't erase impact. I hear your fear of losing ground, but your ground doesn't come from pushing me down." Rick suspended the man for 3 weeks without pay. He required him to attend 3 listening sessions, make a public apology, and earn reinstatement only if Carmen and Lucia confirmed his sincerity. The man nodded, his eyes wet. "I am sorry," he whispered. For the first time, he looked directly at Carmen. She gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. The poster was cleaned but not replaced. Instead, Rick framed it, with the stains faintly visible, and hung it back on the wall with a caption: "Defaced. Repaired. Stain kept to remember." Lucia added softly, "And list the names of those who scrubbed it clean. Community justice includes everyone, even those who erred." Heads nodded around the lobby. For once, correction wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about weaving them into memory. That evening, Rick sat again at table 12 in the library. His notebook was filled with crooked Mandarin radicals. His tones still stumbled, his characters slanted. But beside him sat Mrs. Wang, nodding warmly. Dr. Ahmed whispered encouragement, and Lucia, arms crossed, reminded him, "Next week, no excuses. Bring your homework complete." Rick chuckled. For once, failure didn't sting. It felt like learning. He looked around the modest wooden tables. The children bent over their books, the parents whispering encouragement, the immigrants practicing English with trembling hands. This place was no marble tower, and yet it was stronger. Because here, power wasn't in mocking laughter. It was in the quiet nod of someone who believed you could try again. One evening, a security guard named Thomas shyly presented a proposal to improve the company's emergency systems. It was detailed, practical, brilliant. Rick approved it immediately. "Promote him to operations," he ordered. The HR team hesitated. "But he's security staff, no degree." Rick slammed his palm on the table. "He has the skill. He has the plan. That's the degree I need." The message spread quickly. Talent wasn't locked in diplomas. It could be found anywhere. But not everyone celebrated. At a private dinner, Rick's old friend Bradley Carter sneered again. "So this is you now, Saint Sullivan? Next you'll be handing out your penthouse keys to janitors." Rick met his gaze calmly. "If they can run a company better than me, maybe I should." Bradley scoffed. "You've lost your edge." Rick smiled faintly. "No, I've finally sharpened it on the right stone." That weekend, Rick visited Carmen's modest apartment for the first time. The small living room smelled of rice and beans cooking on the stove. Books lined the walls, dog-eared, borrowed, stacked in piles. He looked around, astonished. "You have more books here than I do in my penthouse." Carmen shrugged lightly. "Books don't need chandeliers. They just need light." Lucia sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling Mandarin characters onto practice sheets. She glanced up at Rick. "Homework?" Rick chuckled and pulled out his own notebook. His characters were still crooked, his tones still shaky. But when he stumbled, Carmen's laughter wasn't cruel, it was warm. For the first time in decades, Rick felt not judged, not admired, not feared. Simply welcomed. Weeks turned into months. The scholarship students began their first semester. Libraries buzzed with new learners. Sullivan Tech's turnover dropped further. Productivity rose. And for once, Rick didn't measure success in margins alone. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside his office window, Rick stood before the same black marble desk where he once mocked Carmen and her daughter. He remembered his metallic laugh, the smirk, the arrogance that once echoed in this room. Now the silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was open. Lucia's voice echoed in his memory. True wealth is not counted in money, but in the ability to see dignity in every person. Rick whispered to himself, and true power doesn't humiliate, it lifts. For the first time, the 52nd floor didn't feel like a throne above the city. It felt like just another classroom, waiting for its next lesson. Autumn arrived, painting Central Park in shades of gold and crimson. Students with backpacks hurried across sidewalks, their breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Among them were dozens of young men and women who carried something more precious than books: the weight of opportunity. They were the first recipients of the Sullivan Scholarships. Some were children of janitors, taxi drivers, waitresses, bus drivers. Many were the first in their families to step foot inside a university. At NYU, a scholarship student named Maria Lopez walked through the tall gates with trembling hands, clutching her admission letter. Her father stood beside her, still smelling faintly of subway grease from his night shift, tears shining in his tired eyes. "Papa," Maria whispered, "we made it." At the same time across town, another scholarship student, Jamal Brown, adjusted his headphones as he sat in a lecture hall. His mother cleaned hospital floors at night. Now, Jamal scribbled notes for his first computer science class, determined to build software that would help hospitals run more efficiently. Stories like theirs multiplied across the city. Each one traced back to a moment in the marble tower when a girl spoke 9 languages and a man laughed. Rick Sullivan watched these stories unfold with a strange mix of pride and humility. Every Friday evening, letters from scholarship students were delivered to his office, not by assistants, but by Carmen Johnson herself. She refused to let them be filtered through secretaries or screens. Rick read each one carefully. Some were written in shaky English, others in bold cursive. Some shared struggles with balancing work and study. Others described triumphs: first A grades, first published essays, first debates won. One letter, from a boy named Elijah, ended with, "I don't want to be rich, Mr. Sullivan. I want to be like Lucia, rich in words." Rick folded that one gently and placed it next to Maria's in the notebook he now carried everywhere. At Sullivan Tech, the cultural shift was undeniable. The listening circles had become a monthly tradition. Employees from all levels sat together: engineers, cleaners, managers, and interns. They shared stories, grievances, and ideas. The cafeteria now displayed a board titled "Hidden Talents Wall." Employees pinned up notes. Rosa in housekeeping speaks 3 languages and tutors kids after her shift. Marcus from security plays jazz saxophone. Catch him at Blue Note on Saturdays. Aisha in customer service writes poetry in Arabic. It wasn't about showcasing hobbies. It was about saying aloud what had always been invisible. People are more than their job titles. Even productivity reports reflected the shift. Turnover dropped further. Employee satisfaction climbed. Profits, ironically, rose, not because of cost-cutting, but because people felt seen. Rick often chuckled privately. The ROI that Mark Green demanded was finally here, but it came dressed in dignity, not numbers. But perhaps the most dramatic transformation was in Rick himself. Every Tuesday, he still arrived at Table 12 of the New York Public Library. His Mandarin had improved, slowly, painfully, but steadily. He could hold basic conversations, order food, even read simple texts. When he stumbled, Mrs. Wang corrected him gently. Dr. Ahmed smiled with encouragement. And Lucia, stern, precise, but fair, kept him honest. One evening, Rick completed a passage without error. The room erupted in small applause. His cheeks flushed, not with shame but with joy. "Not bad," Lucia said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You sound almost human now." Rick laughed heartily. "Coming from you, that's high praise." He realized something then. The marble tower had always made him feel larger than life, but here in this modest wooden room, he felt human, and that was worth far more. The city began to notice the transformation not as gossip, but as inspiration. A magazine ran a feature, "The CEO Who Learned to Listen." A documentary filmmaker started following the scholarship students, capturing their journeys. And at a conference, a renowned economist declared, "Sullivan Tech has proven that dignity is not a liability. It is the strongest form of capital." Still, critics remained. Some sneered it was all performance. Others argued the scholarships were a drop in the ocean. But every time Rick wavered, Carmen's steady presence reminded him, it doesn't matter if it's a drop. What matters is that the ocean feels it. One winter evening, an event was held at the New York Public Library to celebrate the first semester of scholarship students. Families filled the great hall, lights glowing softly against tall marble pillars. At the center, a modest stage had been set. On it stood Rick, Carmen, and Lucia. Carmen wore a simple navy dress. Her hands still carried the calluses of years of cleaning, but she held herself with quiet pride. Lucia, taller now, wore a white blouse and black skirt. Her notebooks were tucked under her arm, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked not like a child, but like a teacher. Still young, but carrying wisdom that far exceeded her years. Rick stepped to the podium. His voice, once sharp and metallic, was calm and clear. 8 months ago, I laughed. I laughed at a girl who spoke 9 languages. I laughed because I thought money gave me the right to dismiss knowledge, to dismiss dignity. But that laughter cost me something far greater than pride. It cost me my humanity. The room was silent. Rick continued. Tonight, I stand not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a student. My teachers are here, Lucia Johnson, Mrs. Wang, Dr. Ahmed, and so many others. They taught me tones and characters, yes, but more than that, they taught me that respect is the foundation of any true wealth. He turned to Carmen, his voice softer. Carmen Johnson, you once carried my trash out of my office. Tonight you carry my respect, and that will not fade. Carmen's eyes glistened, but she stood tall. Finally, Rick turned to Lucia. And you, young lady, showed me what power really is. Not the power to humiliate, but the power to educate. You changed a man who thought he could not change. And you showed me that laughter can wound, but words can heal. Lucia stepped forward, her small figure commanding the vast hall. She opened a notebook and read aloud, her voice steady. True wealth is not in gold, but in gratitude. True strength is not in towers, but in truth. True legacy is not in names carved in stone, but in names spoken with respect. The hall erupted in applause. Families stood, students cheered, and even shareholders wiped at their eyes. Rick felt tears rise, not from shame, but from relief. For the first time in decades, he felt free. Later that night, after the crowd dispersed, Rick stood with Carmen and Lucia outside the library. Snowflakes drifted through the lamplight, settling softly on their shoulders. "You've built something bigger than a company," Carmen said quietly. Rick shook his head. "We did. Without you, without Lucia, I'd still be blind." Lucia looked up at him, eyes serious but kind. "Remember, you're still a student. Homework never ends." Rick laughed softly. "Yes, teacher." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the snow cover the city. The marble towers glowed faintly in the distance, but here on the library steps, the world felt warmer. Lucia's final words that night lingered in Rick's heart long after he returned home. Languages can be forgotten, money can be spent, towers can fall. But dignity stays if you protect it. That's the only wealth worth keeping. And for once, Rick Sullivan, billionaire, student, human, understood. If you enjoyed this African folktale, and learned something new from it, don't forget to give this video a like, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. And for more inspiring folktales like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for the next story.